Today, I don't think I'm even going to watch just a film. I'm going to, likelihood, might still, change my mind at the last second. These things happen, but not really. But, likelihood, I will watch a series this time. Although, not exactly a very long running series. Not at all in comparison to, the NHK dramas, which I have still yet to watch any of. So, otherwise, something like Bates Motel, which is 50 episodes. That's That was quite something. No, this is 11 episodes, which is similar to the runtime of every episode. Is also similar to a uh, a, a core, I guess you might say. When it comes to anime, at least. I think it's Japanese as well. It's called Deadstock. But what's weird is that I tried to do this cursory search online about it, and since the words are seemingly so common, I got everything but it, and there really weren't many pages about it at all. Just like a few on some obscure fan wikis or such. Not really much more than that. I was wondering whether it was adapted from a manga or something. That's what they do often at times. But there's really no information about it, so no idea. I don't think it was, but no clue. At any rate, I'll begin watching it for now. And it begins as a sort of comedy trope, really. With regards to lateness and such, that's so comedic. This is so labeled as some sort of horror, so I have no idea what's coming up yet. But I can see vibes from the fact that the interview needs to go to somewhere on the ground with what seems like rust on the walls. Yeah, I wouldn't go underground for an interview. I just wouldn't. I absolutely wouldn't. With rust, and it couldn't be. TV Tokyo, on the other hand, is renowned as far as I know, so I'd be surprised if they had interviews on the ground. Yeah. It has a seriously confusing credit sequence where it makes you think that he's going to watch some unknown video, and yet suddenly he's in it. What makes no sense. So then, is he really in it, or is it just some fanciful credit sequence? And in likelihood it's that, but no idea really. Otherwise, seems interesting. It's about tapes, so I can't help but think of Ringo, but it doesn't have quite the same vibe either, so I don't know. Also, whoever came up with the idea of annoying people for the heck of it, just um, you know, with regards to the car horn, it is just such an annoying sound that I can't possibly associate it with horror, so it's just ridiculous. Or anything cursed, really. I cannot. It's just an annoying sound, that's it. And by the way, those arches and the building is also so annoyingly made. I'd absolutely hate to be regularly there, having to hunch yourself to go anywhere. It's just ridiculous. Like, couldn't they make anything higher? Like, everyone needs to lower the position to go anywhere. It's not exactly very low. Yeah. And yeah, what do you know? It relies on shocks as well. At least it does at some point. We'll see if it does as much as the Ghost that I watched yesterday. I don't know. It's also about ghosts as it happens. I don't know. I just happened to. It's not like I knew it was going to be about ghosts. I really try not to not even read the synopsis very usually. So I just went into this, blindly really, but somehow it turned out to be about ghosts as well. Maybe I am cursed after all. It's kind of funny. She says that she's testing her talent as a director. What, in the dark in a car in a town? What? It makes no sense. But yeah. It's that's quite a job, isn't it? Honking horns. But yeah, if something repeats, shock in particular, as many times, and it loses. It's a fact, really. Mostly. Clearly not to the characters, though. Also, I wonder why does he later on have, later on in the first episode, near the end, he has this shirt that says, "I don't want to know what time it is." I have no idea why, but there we go. Also, what does AD stand for? It's very difficult. I tried to search online and I couldn't. Obviously, there are many other more popular AD acronyms, and I'm assuming maybe audio data. I'm not sure. Familiar with AV, audiovisual, but not AD. So yeah, finished first episode. It was sort of interesting. Relied on shocks too much, though. It did feature a bit of like subjective distress, psychological distress, just a bit as a result of the shocks, presumably. I don't know really why people would ever be shocked about things that are some weird, bizarre, random events when there are real things that happen that can very much induce trauma. But anyway, this song at the end was quite nice. Whoever was singing it there, it was quite a nice exit from the episode. Yeah, and the next one seems to be about dolls. So that's dolls always feature somehow in horror tropes. Hopefully not many shocks, but well, of course, this is a shocker. What are they called? Shockers? Huh? We don't know if they have like slashers or something. Shockers, I have no idea. And yeah, continuing on to the second episode, and the video this time is a bit sort of, I don't know, weird. I mean, it doesn't actually rely on shock as much as creepiness, I suppose, which is a slight better aspect, but it's not really very creepy either. I don't know, I guess dolls can be a sort of, well, dolls is what children play with, so I don't know why they are considered creepy. I mean, they could, I guess, be depicted as creepy, but not exactly how it was depicted in this video. It's not quite very creepy. Also, I wonder, why was it that this director person in the first episode, this is seemingly gave the newly employed guy the cold shoulder. She was seemingly ignoring him at first, and yet afterwards it was just fine, really. So it wasn't even mentioned or anything. It's kind of strange. I mean, why did it happen at all? She was playing with her fingers or something, whatever she was doing. Yeah. But yeah, at least in the second episode, we get to see a temple now, as opposed to some run-down garage full of trash and weird stuff. Temples are always very elegant. They have this simplistic style. The second episode is actually, it's definitely better than the first one, which was about some ridiculous honking. So even though the found footage video itself wasn't that creepy, the story behind it otherwise is quite intriguing, and it has an actual sensible story behind it, as opposed to supposed creatures in the dark or whatever, and not to mention, the elegance of the temples, and it's quite strange to see temples full of dolls. To be fair, I've never seen such a thing. It looks like a doll worship service or something. But otherwise, yeah, interesting. By the way, the transition between human and doll was pretty cool there. Uh, yeah, from a single image of a few seconds, it really asks what the difference is between humans and dolls. Obviously, dolls are supposed to be representation of such, but so yeah, as predicted, this episode. I mean, it's not exactly. I haven't exactly watched much so far, just a couple of episodes, but it's definitely my favorite. It'll be very hard to top this. It had a mixture of both fear and pathos. It was quite interesting. Other than that, I mean, the first one was weak and relied on shocks. I mean, this one had a few shock moments, but not the majority of it. The third one seems to be about cursed dolls, which I'm assuming relies on shocks as well. But I doubt it will have as powerful a story as the second one. Well, we'll see. I mean, it's not very good to be prejudiced, I guess. But I don't know, dolls. These straw dolls, reminiscent of, in fact, the whole premise of the Stephen King's story about calling people, which isn't quite the most amazing, but anyway, that's the whole point. And these, I'm not sure if they have a specific name, or well, we'll see. And what do you know? For the third episode, we have another temple. Now I wonder though whether there's a difference between a temple and a shrine. They seem fairly similar things, architecturally, and I think there may be slightly different. So obviously, yeah, I suppose a shrine can be much smaller as well. I suppose, but yeah, as opposed to the respect that the other priest had for a doll, this guy simply wants to sell his wares. The forest makes it nice to look at the very least, as opposed to the two others, which were mostly set inside buildings. And there's also some Greek theatre, so not just straw dolls. That's more than Stephen King does and his calm people thing. Also, as a note, ka.video has correctly synced subtitling because .sh doesn't. And yeah, I correctly predicted who. Well, maybe not quite early on who was doing the casting, but who the casting was directed to. Well, after a specific event, anyway, that was clear as to what the relationship is. But yeah, as also predicted in the previous episode, I mean, it's quite difficult anyway to to set a similar standard. In a way, the previous episode was also about revenge, but not quite, more about sadness. Whereas this one was revenge, I suppose that the first episode really had little sense at all. I mean, I don't know, in a way, because it was trying to say that the dead themselves can make some sort of curse, I guess. But I don't know, honking 3 times was just so ridiculous that it took away the any sense. I don't know why they made it first. You know why it's the first episode when it's so weak. Like any of these other two could have been put first. Really, it would have been better. Any other, I bet. Any other episode would have, I bet. But I don't know. What was the point? I mean, yeah, we get it. A tunnel is creepy, but honking 3 times that just breaks away any creepiness, really. Anyway, I mean, honking is annoying, but also ridiculous. If you know, I mean, when you're stuck in traffic and people are honking all around, it's not exactly creepy, isn't it? It's just annoying. I mean, it's annoying to be stuck in traffic in the first place. Not that I was. I mean, well, I guess I could have been as a passenger. But anyway, yeah, it's just the third one was mediocre, but not as mediocre as the first one. So we'll see what the fourth one is about. It seems like schools are involved. So the fourth one seems like it could be interesting. It holds promise. The music is nice as well. Also, interestingly, they mentioned something called group possession, which I've actually never heard before. I mean, well, besides peer pressure, I guess, which is sort of like a form, I guess, but actual absolute possession, I doubt, it could actually exist in real life. Besides delusion, I suppose that's one way. I mean, if somebody deludes themselves into thinking they are possessed by whatever, then they might be, But otherwise, whether it's some demon or a group or a cloud makes little difference, I suppose. And isn't it kind of funny how people seem to mingle about a watered down version of an Ouija board? I mean, that's quite something, right? So if you can afford a huge board, you use a coin instead in some writing. Yeah, well, I guess do it yourself Ouija board. Well, I definitely still like the end song. Yeah, this was certainly better than the one that precedes it. Still not as good as the second one though. But well, it's more fragmented than the second one. Like, a major incident that happens in the tape isn't quite addressed. It might be referenced at the end, but not quite addressed, and I'm not entirely sure how the girl who likes Kokori-san so much is related to the girl from the tape. It's not obvious. I mean, whether it's her or not. Um, and yeah, it's about social rejection, and I mean, yeah, I guess it can be difficult for some people, but it's quite a manifestation of difficulty. It's not quite that, obviously. In real life it wouldn't be that, but could still result, I guess, in some sort of fantasization of vengeance or something. But well, anyway, this is what this Deadstock series is doing. It's all about aspects of what people might think could happen with regards to supernatural topics. Like, the second one is about in a way, it's all about death in one way or another, but it's how the death comes about, how it's approached, how it's perceived and tackled, and there's just slightly different pathways as well. Although, I suppose, well, there's both curses, I guess, and possession, and yeah, I think those two mainly so far. Second one, maybe a bit of both. Now, the fifth episode highlights, I think, what is a bit off with the opening. I always thought the opening was quite jaunty, quite happy and stuff, when considering the topics generally of this. Now, so far the tapes haven't been this drastic, but the fifth episode, there's actually, I think, for the first time so far, there's blood. So that's quite something. I mean, with Western horror films, there's usually blood in the first minute, if not seconds. But yeah, no, then I mean, this fifth episode now skips to the opening then, and this is after these incidents, which seemed quite serious, and it's a bit weird seeing this. Seeing that the guy juggling tapes or whatever he's trying to do, rewinding them, and the song, which is quite I don't know, sounds like it's happy, I guess. I don't know. Just yeah. I mean, I like the song. I like the opening actually. It's just it seems a bit weird. But yeah, being at nearly halfway through the series, I mean, having 11 episodes, I guess it would be around the half of this episode, I think, because if it actually not the half of the next episode, I think. Actually, no, not quite. No, I think this. Anyway, but the point I wanted to make is it's not a bad series. It's certainly better than most horror films I've watched recently that rely on too many cliches. I mean, it doesn't have cliches. Most in the genre have, but it has sort of other feelings as well, not just, and it doesn't just try to elicit either disgust like the Three Mothers trilogy did try to elicit, or I mean, it does rely on shocks, but not that much either. I mean, it sort of relies on pathos as much as shocks, or sometimes at least. At least it did in the second and fourth episodes. Not so much the third and the first. I mean, not really. Anyway, yeah, but it's interesting series nonetheless, and it's kind of curious how there's so little information about it online. I mean, it's was released 3 years ago now, 2017, and on IMDb only 12 rated it. That's quite a few people, just very few. I mean, in comparison to even a lot of, I suppose, people like watching anime even more, but coming from the same country, this is sort of similar to anime like Boogie Pop Phantom and such, and that's, I think that may have been popular. I'm not entirely sure, I forgot now, but that's the one I can think of right now. That is episodic and such, retains some of the characters perhaps. That's the most similar, deals with similar topics at least. By the way, I'm not sure if anyone ever notices it, considering there's so much stuff. But in one of the rooms that they're in, mainly in the TV Tokyo headquarters, as I say, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of files and folders. Most of it is normal office stuff that is usually present in most offices with loads of stuff. But there is only one item that I can see from this angle at least, that alludes to the horror genre, I guess you could say. It's at the top. I mean, obviously the direction it's in and differs based on the angle, but it's at the top. It's near the light tube, near another sort of head of some sort, but the mask is clearly quite visible near to it. It's white with black eyes, and it's seemingly smiling. Looks almost like the Joker, but not quite. I'm not sure what it is. That's pretty much the only thing, though. Other than that, there's just official sort of stuff, loads and loads of folders. So not really horrific things, unless one is deadly afraid of folders, which one might be if one works in an office extensively. And by the way, a bit more trivia now with regards to Japanese mythology. So the previous episode, the fourth episode, was the first one that mentioned Kitsune and Tanuki, right? Just before they mentioned group possession as an alternative to possession by Kitsune or Tanuki. Now, if people didn't know, I mean, what they were in the fourth episode, then there's no hints or any telltale signs or such. They need to look them up. But in the fifth episode, there is a Tanuki statue, one of these huge, absolutely huge. I mean, it's bigger than any of the people nearby. I think it's over 6 foot tall. Yeah, must be about 6'5" maybe. Quite amazing. Couldn't even find even small statues that didn't cost a lot. Yeah, Tanuki are fun creatures. Hopefully they'll deal with them even more than just simply alluding to them or statues. If they actually try to depict mythological creatures, that'd be pretty interesting. Because obviously it's one thing for anime to do so. It's quite easy to animate them, but I guess to depict them in live action series is another thing. They need to use either CGI or some crude costume, I guess. At one point in the fifth episode, she touches her elbow nearly and looks at the guy that's usually with her. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Seems like she wants to say something without the other people knowing, but I really have no idea. I mean, he's carrying a some sort of bag on his hand, or at least he was in the earlier scene. So I'm not sure if it's referencing that, but it doesn't seem like it. Also, soon after, there's a shot of several torii structures, that thing that looks like an H without the lower line. Yeah, they were also mentioned in the previous episode, not shown except in handwriting. But in this episode, the actual structures are shown. And the Barona gets involved finally, just a bit, anyway, for a few seconds. By the way, they seem to have started putting the logo in between transition shots, so they didn't do that before. So yeah, this episode was Jason Voorhees of Deadstock. I like the interaction between the three characters. By the way, it's interesting. I like how they turn this thing with regards to samurai. I've recently been studying the Sengoku period, so sort of resonates a bit slightly differently as well. Yeah, but otherwise, uh, it's the series is growing on me, I suppose one might say. The second episode is still the better one so far, but all of them have something interesting. I mean, apart from the third one was about was slightly cheap, but otherwise it's sort of interesting, I suppose one might say. Um, hmm. So we shall continue Deadstock from episode 6. Uh, yeah, as I've mentioned earlier, I mean, I'm becoming interested, increasingly interested. I mean, they're quite distinct stories, but otherwise, they're interesting, aren't they? They're not uninteresting, at least. So, not expecting nothing. I mean, yeah, I do though certainly hate it when they resort to cheap fights and especially shouts. It's just so cheap. I mean, it's not really a meaningful existential terror or anything. Oh, and he changed his shirt. Now it says, "Have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it." It's quite a yeah. That's like an anti sort of optimistic thing. But in a way, it's sort of motivating, isn't it? So I mean, one should really not care about perfection and just do whatever. It's not like there is not really perfection per se. There's only just adequacy at least. Anyway, still not sure how any of these shirt slogans relate to this series at all. Like before, it was about time, but I'm not entirely sure how. I suppose if we're discussing, I mean, existence and curses and such, but still, curses, I'm not sure exactly. Guess time may be a curse, I don't know. Yeah, the sixth episode seems it included quite a few ideas that were quite expansive, so about mortality, life and death, and its math still didn't seem conclusive despite concluding. It still didn't really tie all the knots together. But otherwise, it tried to do some things. I mean, certainly better than the third episode, but it still didn't, come full circle, sort of. And it didn't resonate as much either. And the rationalization that was given wasn't quite fulfilling either. I mean, it was just something that was seemingly brought up out of nowhere and then not really pursued much further. The way it ended then was reminiscent of Men in Black, I suppose, but it obviously won't go there again like that franchise does, so I'm not even sure why it happened. Either way, I suppose it's the only way to end it, really, 'cause otherwise the alternative didn't allow for, I guess, the future and such. But hmm, I still preferred the second and the fifth more. I think it was the fifth. No, what was it? And then the one with where which is set in a school. That was also interesting. Not too much, but yeah, the second is still my favorite, I suppose. It really felt like a more wholesome experience, wholesome in the sense that it really covered a lot of ground and felt quite interesting at the very least. Also, in this 6th episode, the male protagonist was spouting some cliches, really, that could have done without, really. I mean, it's not like it resulted in anything anyway, and so wasn't any more fulfilling, so I'm not sure why they want to include cliches for the heck of it. The ending then questions human motives, it seems, which was kind of interesting until then. It also sort of ended in a cliche, I suppose. Yeah, we resort to cliches a lot. Oh, the 7th episode, I think, is only the 2nd episode where suicide is the topic. I forgot which other episode number was, but the other one didn't address it very well, as in, the suicide itself. The cause of it was only implied, and then the person wasn't clearly connected to the person who's later discussed and such. So hopefully they do a slightly more coherent job in this sense, I suppose. But it's more about disappearance of their bodies rather than any single individual committing suicide, so I suppose it's even less personal than the other episode. By the way, this series has something with regards to the brightness of the colors and such. Like, this episode is set in the forest, and yet, I mean, it's supposed to be day in the forest, and yet it's really obscure, almost dark. I mean, later on it's dark, but it's really like this throughout, which is why it's sort of similar to Book of Pop Phantom in this case, because they tone down the colors there as well. I'm not sure if they have a similar intention here, but yeah, this 7th episode was even less enlightening, in my opinion, less fulfilling than the other one, also about suicide. Not quite. The other episode, which is set in a forest, is sort of even less edifying, really, but both of them really are incredibly interesting. This 7th episode so seemed to just end abruptly almost. I'm not entirely sure. It wasn't really. I mean, the second one is obviously still the best by far, but hopefully the rest have a chance of being better than any of these, because this is not very, in my opinion, very interesting. I mean, even the episode with the samurai was a slight bit more horrifying than whatever these creatures were. Looked like Chewbacca or something, but really made even less sense than Chewbacca, and that's saying a bit. By the way, I'm not entirely sure what the words on the back of the yellow shirt mean exactly. It seems to say no watch, no maps. I think this is the one that on the front says I don't care about time or something. Yeah. With regards to the alarm clock in episode 8, well, alarm clocks are always annoying, but weirdly enough, I was able to predict an obvious situation. Sometimes the lack of logic is obvious as to what the situation is. They're really going all out with annoying noises in the 8th episode. So there was an alarm clock, a bell of some kind, and a child crying. Also, strangely enough, there seemed to be a subtitling error at one point. Subtitles seemed to be later on. I mean, for at least 2 sentences that I wanted translated, where subtitles appears much later on, like a minute later or something. And but then I think they fixed themselves suddenly, magically, at 13:49. Strangely, maybe the producers working on the subtitles as well. Yeah, I like the ending song even more so. In the 8th episode, it was much more appropriate than most other episodes. I suppose it kind of is when one is dealing with sort of pathos inclined narratives. And yes, I suppose what happened makes sense in a way. One could sort of predict it, but not that much. I mean, the mother was there, 2 other times before, so she wasn't exactly there very often anyway. But yeah, so this was an episode that focused exclusively almost on the male protagonist. But yeah, so this is also the first episode which ended on a cliffhanger practically, and that doesn't normally happen. So from a preview, I didn't watch everything, but well, it continues on. It should really, otherwise cliffhanger makes no sense. So I wonder whether the remaining 3 episodes will all be about him as well, because I don't know. This was at least. So yeah, this could prove to be interesting, and I quite liked how this was both creepy and filled with pathos as well. Mostly creepy though. The letter at the end. What I didn't like, obviously, were all the annoying sounds, but I guess they did that for a reason, for a symbolic reason. There was also a telephone as it happens, but didn't ring for long anyway. Yeah, and actually this episode also made more sense of the one set in the pub where although the next one probably possibly make more sense, since it will go into what Sama did, and Sama was involved in the pub. He got drunk for some reason and then left though. But yeah, what happened there, with regards to what the male protagonist said at the end to the mother, I thought it was cliched at first, but I suppose in this context it makes slightly more sense and slightly less cliched, I guess, in context at least. Yeah, it's this was a crucial episode, I suppose. So yeah, the 10th episode is implying that this is some weird version of X-Men, apparently. Well, of course, there's been all sorts of paranormal stuff, from cases to possession. Of course, there'll be telekinesis. I'm surprised there hasn't been teleportation yet. What else could we tele? And yeah, it seems like the last 4 episodes are going to be about this single story, which I guess is his choice that I guess directors make. yeah, and it's sort of an interesting story. I mean, yeah, this the ninth episode was mostly informational, so didn't have that much sort of pathos in it, just informational mostly. And I'm not sure what one needs to make with this information, except for what comes after, I suppose. As in, ended with him finding somehow this other person, and so then obviously what happens after then is backed up with what we learn in the ninth episode. Otherwise, it would make little sense. So what happens afterwards would make little sense. I mean, it still makes little sense, but anyway, this is, I suppose, you know, yeah, it's always been fictional, this sort of fiction anyway, and but yeah, interesting, I suppose, as usual. Just it's standalone episodes have effectively finished, I suppose, now, which I suppose is one sort of direction. I still prefer though the kind of preferred standalone episodes, but this could work as well, I suppose. For characterization, it certainly does. I mean, otherwise, the choice between either standalone episodes all the way through, or no, and having no characterization, as opposed to this, which, in a way, this makes sense, because otherwise, you know, like in this story, we find out why, for example, obviously, as mentioned in the previous episodes, makes sense of why he was talking about mothers generally, I suppose. So in that episode where in a pub and such, and in this one, sort of find out who the pub owner is as well. Not that pub. I think it's a different pub actually. So there are two pubs, but the other one, where Sayama regularly visits, and sometimes the male protagonist does as well. So yeah, although it's not quite clear who she was and how she participated, but I'm assuming she was a participant. Just that she did at least talk to his mother before. Anyway, yeah. So it's 3 episodes that the arc consists of, not 4 clearly. That was quite a nice ending. Yes, it's I like the pathos aspect. This was for more more with pathos than otherwise. It had just a slight bit of gore, but it wasn't overwhelming. Not like the Three Mothers trilogy that was sort of gore for the sake of it, not even contextually very relevant. But yeah, this made sense. Uh, as usual, I like how the characters interact with each other. The three mainly, and it was an interesting conclusion. Although yeah, this would have made sense if it was the last episode. I'm not sure what the 11th will be like now. But in the preview, it seemed like it was about bending spoons. So I guess we're going to tackle the Matrix sort of theme for just one episode. I don't know. I don't suppose it will reach the heights that these 3 episodes reached. I suppose it's sort of like it was quite interesting because it was a beginning, which we dealt with his mind and the tape, which was only like a cursory look at what actually happened and why he ended up like that, and then the middle, which dealt with the actual issues and the information given for such issues, and then the end, which really concluded it. And quite interestingly, I mean, there were several dimensions to it. Like literally, there was a psychological side to it, and it was, I really very much liked how they delved into the past and how they depicted them as children. I think it's interesting because both of them, I suppose, were affected as children, and so were sort of consoling themselves in that state because they were in that state back then, even though they're no longer in that state now. And then how it ended, I suppose, it sort of made sense, not a lot, but I mean, it makes sense in this I mean, wow, it's not like telekinesis even exists, so it made sense within this fictional context, fictional in-universe context. Otherwise, it's not really, I suppose you could say. Well, anyway, we'll see what the last episode is about then. Well, the 11th doesn't seem to be as focused as most other episodes, even the standalone ones. It seems to meander, and it's more of a documentary style thing. It doesn't quite have the others. I mean, most others had a sort of, I guess you could call it a crime. This one doesn't. It really is different from all others. This one is quite aimless. I suppose it can make sense in some way. I mean, it does share I guess a theme of the supernatural with the others, but not quite the same point, I suppose. Also, it's kind of funny that this guy says that he's the first, or at least I don't know. Well, he uses this term power spot. Apparently, it is connected to Japan, but the first couple of links, yeah, are from Pokemon. So I guess he must be Pokemon, either monster or trainer. I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, it wasn't very cohesive, but I think that was the point, really. I mean, there was a bit of philosophy at the end, but it was really spurious. It was more who were those people again? I suppose rhetorical. It was more I forgot what that word is. Yeah, at the end he broke the spoon instead of bending it, and then I just thought, yeah, that's one way to do it, I suppose. If it's bent enough that it seems like it bends slightly on its own, but then it needs to not fall off, otherwise it's obviously pre-bent. That's one way sort of to I suppose feign bending it. Not it can't actually break, obviously, unless the point is to break it, but then it's pretty obvious that it was pre-bent. But otherwise it was interesting. I mean, with regards to what the shape of a cup is and such. Quite different though, very different from the other episodes. I suppose though they just concluded with that, to make it seem like it's really an effort made out of a documentary rather than a more like every episode. I mean, most episodes were standalone, but they still had this structure of a narrative that began with the investigation and then ended with some sort of resolution. The second episode was still the best, though. I mean, that can't be. I thought it was going to be really one of the better ones, but but yeah, then so there were a few others that were interesting. I mean, his arc was pretty cool, I guess. Had heart in it, you know, just had some sort of heart, I suppose. Made as much sense as it could within the context. It didn't seem like a documentary as such either. It was more, yeah, it was quite a solid narrative. I mean, as an arc on its own, it stands quite well. Um, um, then there were some others that. Yeah, the one with the straw dolls was still sort of the weakest. I thought didn't really make much sense. A bit besides this one, I suppose. I mean, you could say this is pretty weak, the very last one, but weak only because it is aimless. But otherwise, it's not. You know, most other films would make it seem like. You know, like the Matrix, as mentioned previously. I mean, that well, I mean, you know, that spoon bending wasn't exactly the main point of the plot there. It was only used as a device to show sort of a point, but they still made it seem like it was real, and it really isn't. I mean, sure, it was also a perspective, but not quite. It did make it seem like it was. I mean, obviously, it was building up for a bigger narrative, whereas this one wasn't. This was sort of the opposite, really. This was like an anti Hollywood narrative, really, you could say. The main point here was sort of an aimless documentary style thing. I mean, this Kyoto-kun here, he wasn't really. I mean, I don't know if he honestly existed or not. I don't suppose he was, but. I find it funny how he had so much hair before in the tapes, and suddenly he has none. Yeah, I'm not sure what they're trying to say there. I suppose there's some sort of message in that, but well, besides that, the one that you know, time simply makes hair fall out. Well, I don't suppose. I mean, hair could become white as such, but. I don't know. I suppose he could have decided to cut it as well. That's more likely. Or yeah, even more so, the fact that you know, he seemed to have Buddhist inclinations, and monks seem to be inclined to cut their hair totally. I suppose, you know, as much as, you know. In fact, the Matrix did have some Buddhist inspirations as well. So I guess that's some commonality there with regards to spoon bending and Buddhism. I mean, they were both supposed to be about perspective, but as mentioned, this was different. This was aimless, and it was meant to be aimless, I suppose. It could have ended on the 10th episode, but I suppose they just wanted to say, yeah, this should be aimless, and we'll continue aiming to be aimless in a way. I'm not sure if they actually intended this series to continue or not, or if it does continue or not. But either way, it was a pretty cool series. Otherwise, I mean, it wasn't all weak. There were some parts that were weak, but otherwise, it's still interesting in a way. I mean, it's not like they were. It wasn't one of those the type of television that, you know, oh yeah, it's automatically real, everything that is happening is real, don't even question it. No, they did question it. Even this very last episode they did. Even the one who was supposed to be bending spoons questioned it. That's should be really. The other types of stuff, it's just nonsense, really. I mean, because, you know, ultimately it is nonsense, but it's a sort of interesting entertainment. It's just idiotic though when you assume that it is real, that takes it beyond entertainment. And, you reach a point when it can potentially become dangerous. So I think it's preferable to just be aimless in this way, just like the last episode here showed, you know, rather than make it seem like it's something that makes sense when it doesn't really. So yeah, whereas despite the last episode being aimless, the others weren't so aimless. But they were still questioning the very premise of everything, you know. And like with the doll, with the second episode, um, sure, they didn't quite question the fact that maybe the doll doesn't really live. Maybe it is inert after all. I mean, it's all within a context, I suppose. So, the fact that the doll suddenly distorted its face, doesn't mean. I mean, at that exact moment, you don't. The viewers might wonder whether that can happen for real, and it can't happen for real. Obviously, I mean, it's not like a second later it didn't return to normal, but it's within the context. It was what it is. I mean, it doesn't make it necessarily any worse. It just happened, and within the context, it made sense in a way, in a fictional context. Yeah. Ultimately, this isn't a real documentary. It's presented as a pseudo documentary. Otherwise, it does have elements of normal filmmaking as well. But yes, it is interesting in a way. Yeah. I mean, they did focus on random standalone elements for most of the series, but then had an arc. Yeah. That was 3 times as long as most other standalone episodes that focused on the male protagonist, and it was interesting in a way. Ultimately, yeah. I've never seen any of the actors before, so I don't know. I suppose it could be interesting to know what else they did, but I don't generally watch stuff based on actors. So if I ever encounter them in the future, I'm sure I'll recognize them. But other than that, I'll perhaps check what the director did. I suppose that's more, I suppose, in the same vein. But otherwise, yeah, interesting. It was just like the episodes themselves. I end up on this completely randomly, just checking through the horror genre listings, and in fact, it was simply near that friend which I watched before I started the series. So as simple as that. I was simply on the point where the listing starts and continues with the word dead, and that's pretty much it. So, and that stock in the sense, I suppose, refers to the fact that they're old tapes. Well, I mean, that is also very much involved, but that stock in the sense is about. VHS is quite strange seeing them again after so many years. They're really not very much used these days. But I suppose if you have old stock, then it would be VHS, or maybe Betamax or something. It was VHS in this case, I suppose. Well, yeah.